Remember Mos Def, the reason he disappeared, will leave you speechless. What if I told you Mos Def didn't fade away? He was forced out. Not by failure, not by scandal, but by governments, corporations, and a music industry terrified of a free black mind. He was arrested on live TV, banned from his own country, blacklisted by Hollywood, and even labeled a threat to national security, all because he refused to be controlled. This is not just the story of a rapper. This is the story of a man who chose freedom over fame and paid the ultimate price. Before we begin, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because what you're about to hear will change how you see the entire industry forever. When a name becomes a prison, from Mos Def to Yasiin Bey. When Black on Both Sides was released in 1999, Mos Def immediately became the new voice of deep hip-hop. This debut album not only entered the Billboard 200 at number 25, but also sold over 500,000 copies, received rave reviews from Rolling Stone, The Source, and became an icon of conscious rap. Along with Talib Kweli of the group Black Star, he was hailed as the soul of the new generation. But behind the halo, a strange thing happened in the conference room, in contracts, in internal emails of the record label. No one called him Dante or Yasiin anymore. Everyone just called him Mos Def, as if it was not a stage name, but a product that could be exploited endlessly. The offers of advertising, talk shows, commercial events kept coming, but all aimed at the image of Mos Def, the character the industry wanted, not the real person behind the name. At first, he thought it was just part of the success, but the more famous he became, the more he felt alienated from himself. Mos Def became a brand owned by the company, and Yasiin was left out. The labels set the schedules, picked the shows, decided on the songs, even dictated his style. He began to realize they didn't care about his opinions, his emotions, or his art. They just wanted Mos Def, an icon who sold tickets. Creative freedom disappeared, artistic goals replaced by sales. This feeling became even more pronounced as Black Star became famous, because every interview asked him to represent political ideals, not music. He realized he had lost control of his identity. He was no longer in control of his own name. The conflict began to simmer. He turned down several commercial projects, and the label was furious. He asked for control of the content, and they told him no cooperation. He wanted to experiment with new music, and they said Mos Def shouldn't change. Even when recording, he heard his manager say, Mos Def needs to be more cheerful, less serious. It was like a stab in the gut. They didn't say Yasiin should. They said Mos Def as if he were a programmed puppet. The system didn't let artists grow, it wanted to freeze them in the most marketable version. That was the moment he understood the name had been appropriated. Mos Def was no longer him, it was a brand that others were exploiting to make money. And he, the owner of it, was being excluded from ownership. In 2011, he made a bold decision. He dropped Mos Def, publicly changing his name to Yasiin Bey. This was no gimmick. This was an act of reclaiming his identity. Mos Def is history, he declared. I am Yasiin. But the company refused to change his contract. The media continued to call him Mos Def. Show posters still bore his old name. Film studios clearly stated, we only cast Mos Def. Even friends were told, don't let him change his name. Because they weren't afraid of an artist changing his stage name, they were afraid of an artist reclaiming his freedom. Dropping the name that had made him famous was an act of rebellion against the entire entertainment industry system. And from that moment, Yasiin Bey's battle with the power apparatus officially began. Hollywood is a cage, obey the system or disappear. In the eyes of the public, Hollywood is a paradise of fame and opportunity. But for artists who dare to think independently, it is a gilded prison. From the moment Yasiin Bey Mos Def entered the entertainment industry, executives and managers established the rules of the game. Whoever wants to succeed must know how to be quiet, follow instructions, and not cause trouble. Closed meetings, contracts full of clauses, reminder calls from the studio, all aimed at keeping the artist within an absolute framework. Hollywood not only wants his talent, but also wants to control his thoughts, his behavior, and even the way he speaks in public. If he deviates from the orbit, they are ready to freeze his career in an instant. The contracts Yasin signed weren't partnerships, they were surrenders. They included multi-year clauses, took a large chunk of his income, and forced him to appear in advertising campaigns he didn't believe in. At one point, he was forced to endorse a clothing brand he never wore, or to appear in films solely to be a safe face. They tried to turn him into a marketable icon, ignoring his artistic merit. Hollywood executives wanted a fun, friendly, non-controversial Mos Def, and Yasin wanted to create something with depth and a message. When he refused to be a mascot for a commercial, management began to view him as a troublemaker. In this industry, not collaborating means hard to work with, and hard to work with means being out of the game. Commercial pressures began to stifle his creativity. Film and record companies wanted products that were easy to sell, fast, and safe. They demanded catchy songs, released them at the right time, and videos that fit the algorithm. They told him not to be too political, not too complicated, not too real. They wanted him to be a brand rather than an artist. Every time he came up with a new idea, they would show him spreadsheets to prove this won't sell. When an artist is forced to sacrifice their vision to keep their contract creative, freedom is officially dead. Yasin looked around and saw countless colleagues who had been groundbreaking, but within a few years had become watered-down versions of themselves because the system had crushed their individuality to fit the market. At this point, he realized he was no longer in control of his career. He was just an asset in the company's portfolio. Hollywood doesn't build artists, it builds products. If the products don't sell, they remove them and replace them with someone more obedient. Yasin understood that if he continued to keep quiet, he would lose his soul. So he chose the hardest path to rebel against the controlling mechanism. He refused unsuitable roles, accepting to lose money in order to regain control. He said no to fake advertising campaigns, no to cheap scripts, and no to anyone who wanted to define him. And from the moment he rebelled, Hollywood began to find a way to make him disappear. Because in this prison, artists have only two choices: be obedient or be banished from the system forever. The Black Star Trap. When conscious rap becomes a burden. When Black Star debuted in 1998, Yasin Bey and Talib Kweli didn't just release an album, they created a movement. In an era when hip-hop was dominated by violence and materialism, Black Star emerged as a breath of fresh air, intelligent, thoughtful, political, and human. They spoke of community history, responsibility, and self-awareness. They were immediately hailed as icons of integrity, ethical artists in a corrupt industry. Underground fans revered them as the heroes who kept hip-hop alive. But at the same time, an invisible cage began to form if they were seen as standard keepers. What happened when they wanted to change, experiment, or do something different? As Black Star became more popular, the expectations became harsher. Fans and the media didn't just demand that they make good music, they demanded that they be morally perfect. Every word, every decision, every collaboration was scrutinized. If they collaborated with mainstream artists, they were called selling out the underground. If they tried new styles, they were criticized for chasing the market. If they didn't talk about politics, they were labeled rootless. The pressure didn't come from the record labels, but from the fans who loved them. It was a cruel paradox. Fans say they want artists to be free, but when artists stray from the mold they turn their backs. Yasin realized a bitter truth. Sometimes the public can also become shackles. The slogan, "Don't sell your soul," became a double-edged sword. At first, it was a call to uphold values, not to sacrifice identity for money. But gradually, it turned into a threat: one wrong move, and you would be ostracized. Talib Kweli and Yasin were cast as hip-hop's conscience, a role they never took upon themselves. They wanted to be artists, not monks. Yasin once said, "I'm not a politician, I'm a human being." But the public didn't listen. They canonized him and then used that halo to bind him to an immovable image. When artists are not allowed to make mistakes, not allowed to try, not allowed to grow, that's no longer love, that's prison. Yasin began to feel that the Black Star name, once a source of pride, was now suffocating him. He wanted to try new music, to collaborate outside of rap, to act in films, to explore other creative dimensions. But each time he did, he was reminded, Black Star's Mos Def doesn't do that. He gradually understood that they didn't want Yasin, they wanted the version they imagined. A saint who was always right, always moral, always underground. But no one can live in the role of a saint forever. Caught between the expectations of fans and the control of the industry, he began to suffocate. And that was the moment he decided, instead of living up to the image others had created, he would break that box, even if it cost him his career, his reputation, or his freedom. Because it was better to be a flawed human being than a saint chained to his own myth. MTV 2006, Arrest the Night. He challenged the industry and paid the price. In 2006, as Hollywood prepared the red carpet for the MTV Video Music Awards in New York, Yasin Bey wasn't there to pose or promote a product. He was there to say what no one else dared to say. After Hurricane Katrina left more than 1,800 dead and thousands, mostly black, left homeless, the U.S. government was still blaming nature rather than admitting systemic failure. While other artists stayed silent for fear of losing their contracts, Yasin decided to perform Katrina Clap, a rap that denounced government indifference. But he didn't take the main stage. He set up a mobile stage right outside the awards ceremony in the middle of the street, where people could hear the truth that national television didn't want to broadcast. It wasn't just a performance, it was an act of defiance against the entire power structure. He stood on top of a truck, holding a microphone, rapping about the pain of New Orleans when the rest of the country turned its back. The audience in the street stopped and cheered. Cameras snapped. Then within minutes, police cars appeared. Amid the music and cheers, a shocking scene occurred. Yasin Bey was dragged down and handcuffed right in front of the camera, surrounded by hundreds of people filming and taking pictures. No one could believe it. An artist who was speaking out for victims of natural disasters was arrested as a dangerous criminal. The whole process was recorded, spread on the internet and hip-hop forums. To those who understood, he was a hero. But to the system, he had crossed the line. And Hollywood does not forgive those who dare to expose the truth while they celebrate. In the immediate aftermath, the mainstream media began to distort the story. Instead of talking about Katrina, they talked about Mos Def disturbing public order. Variety shows associated him with unstable, unpredictable, and publicity stunt. The industry didn't even need to issue an official ban, it just planted enough negative images to make people doubt him. Magazines that had praised him were now running headlines like, "Is Mos Def on the downswing?" Movie producers were suddenly running out of roles. TV shows were unscheduled. No one said it outright, but everyone understood he had put himself on the blacklist. Then a whisper campaign began behind the scenes. Don't hire him. He's difficult to work with. He's mentally ill. He's against the system. These whispers never appeared on paper, but they were more effective at killing careers than any sentence. His collaborators began avoiding him. His film roles plummeted after 2006. His next album received less promotion. Like a switch being turned off, Mos Def, the acclaimed star, suddenly became a risk to avoid. What was his crime? Not violence, not scandal, not drugs. His crime was daring to use the stage to speak the truth when the system wanted him to stay silent. And from the moment he was handcuffed on the streets of New York, Yasin Bey understood one thing: Hollywood doesn't punish wrongdoers. It punishes those who refuse to keep quiet. The Guantanamo video that terrified the government. In 2013, Yasin Bey decided to take the most daring action of his career, and one that also angered the U.S. government. When news of Guantanamo Bay prisoners being forced to be fed through tubes during hunger strikes spread, many human rights organizations spoke out, but no one really saw the extent of the cruelty. So Yasin agreed to participate in a project by the organization Reprieve, filming himself being subjected to the same force-feeding procedure as the prisoners. No acting, no special effects, real pain. In the video, he was tied to a chair, had a plastic tube inserted into his nose, tears streaming down his face, and had to shout, "Stop," because he couldn't bear it. It wasn't just a show. It was the naked truth that the government didn't want anyone to see. Within hours of its release, the video went viral. BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, The Guardian, all reported on it. Millions shared it. Human rights organizations called it living proof of torture. But as the public applauded his courage, the US government was outraged. A famous artist had just put them in the defendant's chair before the world. Politicians called the video misleading, exaggerated, even treasonous. Some security officials accused Yasin of being a propaganda tool for the enemy. The idea of a rapper using his body to expose the brutality of the state was something they couldn't control, and so they had to destroy his reputation at all costs. The mainstream media began a smear campaign. They stopped calling him Mos Def, the thinking artist, and instead called him Mos Def, the controversial one. They were talking about, why did he do this? Is he desperate for fame? Is this a political stunt? TV stations invited security experts to attack him, saying he doesn't understand national defense is endangering America's image. Some articles blatantly called him anti-American. He went from being a voice of justice to an enemy of the country in the eyes of his former supporters. And Hollywood. They just kept quiet and stood aside because the government did the cleaning for them. But the reason this video broke the camel's back was because it broke the last barrier: fear. Yasin had criticized the government before, performed in protest, and been publicly arrested. But this time he touched on one of the most sensitive topics: Guantanamo Bay, the symbol of American military power. Not everyone dares to expose a state secret by physically hurting in front of a camera. This is no longer art. This is living proof. And when an artist turns himself into a witness, the system cannot forgive. After this video, movie roles disappeared completely. Record labels stopped promoting. Doors that had been open before were slammed shut. No email notification, no official document. But everyone in the industry understood Mos Def was erased from Hollywood. Not because he was wrong, but because he dared to show the world the truth that the powerful wanted to keep hidden. Banned from his own homeland, America refused to let him in. In 2014, after years of living abroad to escape the pressures of Hollywood, Yasin Bey decided to return to the United States for a major tour. It was more than just a series of concerts. It was a homecoming, an emotional return for the Brooklyn-born artist who helped shape thoughtful hip-hop. Tickets sold out in days, and shows were booked in cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Fans were eager for the return of a legend who had been silent for too long. But when everything was ready, the unthinkable happened right at the border. The United States, the country of his birth and citizenship, refused to let him enter. Not because he had committed a crime, not because he lacked papers. The reason was simply procedural issues. Security officers pulled him into a separate room, took his passport, and made him wait for hours. They said there were irregularities in his records, but did not elaborate. He asked to see a lawyer, but they refused. He asked for information from the State Department, but they remained silent. Finally, an official announced, "You are not allowed to enter the country at this time. No warrant, no official document, just a cold sentence." An American citizen born in Brooklyn in 1973 was prevented from returning to his home. The entire tour was canceled. Promoters lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Fans were outraged. The hashtag #LetMosDefine went viral on Twitter. But the government did not respond to any requests for explanation. All legal avenues were blocked. The shock was not just personal, it was symbolic. It was a way for a country to silently banish someone it could not publicly accuse. It could not arrest him for telling the truth. It could not convict him for protesting art. So it used a more effective weapon: bureaucracy. An anonymous ban, a marked record, a silent message to all other artists. If you dare challenge the system, we will make you disappear from the land of your birth. It was the same treatment that happened to Paul Robeson, Nina Simone, Josephine Baker, black artists who dared to criticize power and were forced into exile. History repeats itself only this time, in the age of the internet, in front of the whole world. From that moment, Yasin Bey understood that he no longer belonged to the United States in the traditional sense. He owed America nothing, but America feared his voice. They could not lock him up, but they could lock the borders. They could not knock him down with a gun, but they could take away his right to return home. He became a nomad living between Europe, South America, Africa, nowhere truly belonging to him. Other artists asked why he did not negotiate to return. But Yasin did not want to bow his head. He understood that if he knelt down to be allowed to return, he would lose the most precious thing, his dignity. So he chose the unexpected, to abandon the idea of home in the national sense. And it was this event that paved the way for the next step, seeking freedom in a foreign land, but falling into a new and even more cruel trap. South Africa. South Africa, a false paradise that turned into a political trap. After being blocked from returning to the United States, Yasin Bey headed to what had once been a symbol of freedom, South Africa. In 2013, he moved his entire family to Cape Town, hoping to build a peaceful life away from the toxic spotlight. There, he felt something Hollywood never gave him: air to breathe. He performed at small venues, interacted with local artists, and made music for passion, not for profit. South Africans saw him not as a celebrity, but as a member of the community. No managers, no charts, no label pressure. For the first time in years, Yasin was able to live as a person, not a brand. Cape Town became the place where he rediscovered his artistic identity, free, creative, authentic. But there was a problem he didn't expect. His visa was actually a visitor permit. While he thought his long-term stay was legal, the government considered it a violation to stay longer than 90 days without a residence permit. At first, everything was fine because he was seen as an international artist who brought cultural benefits. But as he began to settle down, sending his children to school, renting a house long-term, and working independently, South Africa's Home Affairs Immigration Agency began to question him. Why would an American star leave everything behind to live here? What was he running away from? What political agenda did he have? And most importantly, why didn't he leave on time? Yasin began to feel he was under surveillance. Every time he applied for a visa extension, they asked for additional documents, asked for detailed reasons, delayed without explanation. The question was repeated. What are you really doing here? Which country are you fleeing from? How long do you intend to stay? Suspicion grew not only from immigration, but also from some senior officials. In a post-apartheid political system, South Africa was sensitive to any international figure with ideological influence. A famous artist who had criticized the U.S. government, fought for human rights, appeared in the global media. To them, he was not just an artist. He was a factor capable of exerting social influence. And once he was considered a risk factor, things became dangerous. From a cultural guest, Yasin was treated as a potential suspect. The authorities refused to extend his stay. They sent him notice to leave the country. Some sources said he was put on a watch list. Interrogative questions arose. Why did you leave the U.S.? Do you have legal problems back home? Are you hiding from someone? What had started as a haven had become a trap. Cape Town was no longer a paradise, but a land where every move was scrutinized. Yasin understood that what scared him was not that he broke the law, but that he did not belong to any system of power. An artist who could not be bought, who refused to be silent, who did not play the good idol, was the greatest threat to those who wanted to control freedom of thought. And South Africa, which was supposed to be the stopping point, became the starting point for the most serious confrontation of his life. The world passport arrest that shocked the entire globe. After months of pressure from South African Home Affairs, Yasin Bey knew his time in Cape Town was coming to an end. His residency was no longer extended. His paperwork was delayed and tensions were running high in his dealings with the authorities. The only decision left was to leave the country. But instead of leaving with a U.S. passport, which the U.S. government had refused to let him use to return home in 2014. Yasin chose an option that reflected his deep philosophy, the World Passport. This is a passport issued by the World Service Authority since 1954, based on the declaration that every human being has the right to travel freely. Some countries have accepted it, but many do not. For Yasin, the World Passport is more than just a document. It is a statement: I am a global citizen, not a prisoner of any border. In January 2016, he and his family arrived at Cape Town International Airport preparing to leave South Africa after 3 years. The security guard held his passport, frowning. They had never seen such a document before. Then they called their supervisor. The supervisor called security. Within 20 minutes, the airport had become a political scene. Yasin was given no explanation, just told to come with us. He was accused of using false documents, violating the conditions of his stay, and deliberately evading immigration laws. In the interrogation room, he tried to explain that world passports were accepted in some countries, that he believed in freedom of movement. But they didn't listen. They didn't see a philosophy, they saw a person defying orders. And when a system feels challenged, it responds with administrative violence. News of his arrest spread like wildfire through the international media. But instead of reporting neutrally, many newspapers ran headlines. Mos Def, arrested for fake passport, rebellious rapper, violates South African law, controversial star, caught in immigration scandal. No one mentioned that he was the victim of political retribution. No one questioned why an American citizen could not return home. The media made him a laughingstock, a man who thought he was special, thought he was above the law, when in truth he just wanted freedom from the borders the system had created. After his detention, the South African government made a final judgment. Yasin Bey was declared undesirable, persona non grata, and banned from entering the country for 5 years. Not only him, but his entire family was also deported. Under house arrest and surveillance, Yasin recorded a message to the world. His voice was tired but determined. And then he announced the unexpected. He announced his retirement from music and film, effective immediately. He said he no longer wanted to be a part of an industry that controlled artists, a world where government and corporations colluded to silence those who dared to speak the truth. It wasn't a surrender, it was an indictment. An artist who had once stood on the Grammy stage, once hailed as the voice of a generation, now had to make his final decision in a prison cell. And in that moment, the trap closed. They weren't just capturing his body. They were trying to capture his voice. But what they didn't understand was, when an artist refuses to be silenced, he doesn't disappear. He becomes a legend. Streaming is the new slave system. Why he refused to play the game. After escaping Hollywood and traditional labels, Yasin Bey thought artists could finally live free thanks to technology. But as the streaming era began to dominate, he realized an even darker truth: power did not disappear. It just changed form. Spotify, Apple Music, and other digital platforms claimed to liberate music, but in reality, they created a new system where artists are exploited more sophisticatedly than in the era of CDs. A song with 1 million streams only brings in about $0.03 per stream, or about $3,000 a figure that is barely enough to live on, let alone the costs of production, mixing, and promotion. Meanwhile, Spotify makes billions of dollars a year, and CEOs earn tens of millions. Yasin saw a familiar pattern: artists create value, but the middlemen get richer. From labels to streaming, the essence remains the same. It's just that the exploiting class is becoming more moral. What angers Yasin is not just the money, but the way streaming turns music into data and artists into content to be mined by algorithms. Instead of listening to a full album and feeling the creative journey, audiences are pushed into computer-curated playlists. Artists must create music that catches the first 30 seconds to avoid being skipped. Songs are no longer works of art. They become products that are quickly consumed. He sees a vicious cycle: streaming encourages short-termism, eliminates depth, and kills voices that dare to go against the grain. "I am not a slave to algorithms," Yasin declares. While most artists are reluctant to surrender for fear of losing their audience, he has chosen the most extreme path, refusing to release music on any streaming platform. In 2019, he made a splash when he released his album Negus, but he didn't release it online or sell it on CD or vinyl. Instead, he turned it into a live listening work of art in a physical exhibition. No secret recordings, no downloads. To listen, you had to go to a designated location, enter a specially designed space, and experience the music as a ritual. "Music is art, not content," he said. Many called him crazy, but those who attended said it was a sacred experience, like listening to a pain, a prayer, a soul. At the center of the exhibition, he displayed a giant painting of Nipsey Hussle, the artist who was murdered in 2019 for daring to be independent and empowering his community. Yasin used Negus to honor Nipsey as the king who refused to bow. Nipsey's story is a reminder in this industry: true artists are often eliminated or killed when they refuse to be controlled. Yasin understands this because he too has been tried to be eliminated not by gunfire, but by silence, by bans, by being pushed off all distribution channels. When he refused to stream, many thought he was self-destructing. But for him, it was a manifesto: "I'd rather be heard by a few people, but fully heard, than heard by millions, but swallowed by algorithms." In a world where everything has to go viral, he chose sacred. In an age where everyone is chasing views, he chose authenticity. And even though he's alone on the front lines, Yasin Bey is willing to fight because there are things more important than money and fame: the right to be an artist. He wasn't alone. The underground alliance of artists who fought back. Yasin Bey is not the only one who realized that the entertainment industry is not a paradise, but a machine designed to control artists and crush those who refuse to comply. Some artists see this truth and decide to break free, even if it costs them money, fame, or even their careers. One of the most famous examples is Dave Chappelle. In 2005, he turned down a $50 million contract from Comedy Central, quit America's most popular show, and disappeared from Hollywood. People said he was crazy, addicted, and kidnapped. But the truth is that Chappelle voluntarily gave up power for his soul, and he flew to South Africa to find peace, just like Yasin later did. His actions became a symbol of artists daring to say no when the rest of society said just accept it. Oscar-winning actress Monique was also a victim of the system. After winning an award for her role in Precious, she refused to participate in unpaid promotions and demanded to be paid fairly. Hollywood immediately punished her. Oprah, Tyler, Perry Lee Daniels, powerful people in the industry, were accused of being behind the blacklisting of Monique. She was labeled difficult to work with, lost contracts, and was removed from major projects for nearly a decade. Her crime was not a mistake, but daring to demand fairness. Monique's story is identical to Yasin's. When artists refuse to play by the system's rules, the system erases them from the map. Cat Williams is no different. Instead of staying silent in the face of injustice, he publicly criticized Hollywood's exploitation of black artists. The result: he was canceled, arrested multiple times on vague charges, and called crazy. But Cat did not back down. He chose to stand outside, produce his own shows, go on his own tours. It's better to be independent than to be a puppet. While many artists are being pushed out, there are still those who have actively created a parallel system, one where they can make art freely and collaborate with each other without asking permission from any of the big names. That's why Kanye West, Kid Cudi Black, thought Freddie Gibbs, and Madlib have continuously collaborated with Yasin Bey even though he is no longer in the mainstream. Kanye and Cudi invited him to work on Kids See Ghosts, an album that is more therapeutic than commercial. Black Thought, one of the greatest lyricists, considers Yasin a creative soulmate. Freddie Gibbs and Madlib, two icons of independent rap, understand the value of artists who refuse to compromise. They don't care about charts. They care about truth. It is these relationships that create an underground alliance, a network of artists who share the same ideology, not letting the industry define their worth. This coalition has no contracts, no logo, no formal organization, but its power lies in the idea that artists can exist outside the system. Dave Chappelle proved you can refuse money and still come out on top. Monique proved you can sue Hollywood and win a multi-million-dollar Netflix deal. Cat Williams proved you can tour independently and sell out. Kanye Cudi Black Thought, Freddie Gibbs Madlib proved you can make world-class music without radio or streaming algorithms. And Yasin Bey is at the heart of it, the one who shows that artistic freedom is not a pipe dream, but a painful but entirely real choice. In an industry that demands artists to be subservient, they choose to be ideological rebels, and history is always written by those who break the rules. The 2025 comeback and the legacy of an artist who couldn't be tamed. After nearly a decade of being considered missing from the mainstream scene in 2025, Yasin Bey unexpectedly returned to music with the album Forensics, collaborating with legendary producer The Alchemist. This was no ordinary comeback. It was like a final declaration of a warrior who survived all the hunts. Without a massive advertising campaign, without radio, without relying on streaming algorithms, he appeared with the demeanor of a man who no longer had to prove anything to the world. Forensics did not cater to tastes, did not follow a radio-friendly structure, but was more like a psychological investigation, dissecting systems, history, identity, pain, and the will to survive. In an era where artists chase TikTok trends to survive, Yasin stepped out as if time had never passed, still upright, still profound, still unyielding. What's surprising isn't just that he's back, but that he's still sticking to his philosophy: art must be free, or it's no longer art. Despite working with the major producer like The Alchemist, he's refused to participate in platforms that exploit artists. He's kept the album distributed through channels he controls or approves, staying away from the big guys who have profited from creative labor. Notably, Forensics isn't just music. It's a crystallization of everything he's been through: being controlled, arrested, exiled, ostracized, misunderstood. Each verse has the feel of someone who stood at the edge of the abyss and stepped back, not out of fear, but because he knew he had his own path. This comeback isn't, "I'm back to reclaim my position," it's, "I never left. I just don't play by your rules." But behind that strength lay a deep personal pain: the death of his mother Sharon Smith in 2023. She was not only his mother, but also his mentor from the beginning, the one who taught him that character is always more important than success. She was behind many of his big decisions, including refusing to compromise with the industry. When she left, Yasin had to face the biggest question of his life. Was it all worth it? He lost money, lost legal citizenship in many places, lost big contracts, lost comfort. He suffered isolation, exile, and humiliation. But looking back on his life, he realized he never lost himself. And that is a victory that no award or contract can bring. The day Forensics was released, a generation of young artists looked at Yasin Bey and understood that there was another way than signing a label or following a trend. He became a symbol of the concept: freedom, fame. He proved that an artist can be erased from the charts, but never erased from history. He showed that you can say no to money, no to power, no to control, and still live, still create, still be respected. Yasin Bey's legacy is not just in his music, but in his attitude. True art cannot be tamed. And in an age where everything is commercialized to the point of exhaustion, the existence of someone like Yasin is not just a rebellion, but a miracle. Yasin Bey lost money, lost access, lost his passport, and was erased from every acceptable stage, yet he never lost himself. In a world where artists are rewarded for obedience and punished for integrity, he proved that freedom is the highest form of success. Forensics isn't just a comeback, it's evidence that the system failed to break him. And now entire generations see him not as someone who disappeared, but as someone who refused to be owned. But here's the real question. In today's industry, can any artist stay truly free without being destroyed? Let's talk about it in the comments only on Legends of Black Excellence.